When I refused to babysit my nephew again, my brother said, "You're discriminating against his ADHD." I stood in my brother Nathan's living room, holding an ice pack against my jaw, where his 7-year-old son, Caleb, had punched me with a metal toy car 15 minutes earlier. The impact had split my lip and loosened a tooth, but Nathan was more concerned about me being ableist than about his kid hospitalizing family members. ADHD doesn't make kids assault people, Nathan. Caleb threw a metal car at my face because I told him he couldn't eat ice cream for dinner. That's not a symptom. That's violence. Nathan crossed his arms and positioned himself between me and the door like he thought I might try to leave before accepting responsibility for triggering his son's condition. You don't understand neurodivergent children. When Caleb gets overstimulated, he has meltdowns. That's a medical response to stress, not violence. If you'd been more patient and accommodating of his needs, this wouldn't have happened. I pressed the ice pack harder against my throbbing jaw and tried to keep my voice calm, even though I wanted to scream. Nathan, this is the 4th time I've babysat Caleb in 2 months. The first time, he shattered my television with a baseball bat because I changed the channel. The second time, he poured bleach in my fish tank and killed all 6 of my fish. The third time, he locked me in the basement for 3 hours while he ransacked my kitchen. And now he's given me a concussion and possibly broken my jaw. None of that is ADHD. That's a pattern of deliberate, escalating violence. Nathan's face flushed red, and he stepped closer, invading my space in a way that felt intentionally threatening. Those were all accidents or symptoms of executive dysfunction. The TV was an impulse control issue. The fish was him not understanding consequences. The basement was him exploring boundaries. And tonight was overstimulation leading to a physical reaction he couldn't control. Everything you're describing is textbook ADHD behavior that any pediatric psychiatrist would recognize. The fact that you're pathologizing a disabled child's symptoms shows your fundamental lack of education about neurodevelopmental disorders. I backed toward the door, and Nathan moved with me, maintaining the uncomfortable proximity. My jaw was throbbing so badly I could barely think straight, but I needed to get out of this house before Nathan convinced me I was the problem. I'm not pathologizing anything. I'm telling you that your son is hurting people, and you're using his diagnosis as an excuse to avoid addressing dangerous behavior. I'm done babysitting. Find someone else. Nathan's expression shifted from defensive to furious in an instant. You're really going to abandon your nephew because he has a disability? You're going to discriminate against a 7-year-old child who needs support and understanding? What kind of uncle does that? His voice got louder with each question until he was almost yelling. The kind who doesn't want to be assaulted in his own home. I'm leaving, Nathan. Don't call me to babysit again. Nathan grabbed my arm as I reached for the doorknob, and his grip was tight enough to hurt. If you walk out that door, if you abandon Caleb because you can't handle his ADHD, I'm cutting you out of this family completely. Mom and Dad will hear about this. Everyone will know you discriminated against a disabled child. I yanked my arm free and opened the door, walking out into the cold evening air while Nathan shouted after me about ableism and discrimination and family loyalty. I got in my car and drove straight to the emergency room because my jaw hurt so badly, I thought it might actually be broken. The ER doctor examined me and confirmed I had a severe contusion but no fracture. She asked how I got the injury, and I hesitated before telling her my 7-year-old nephew had thrown a metal toy car at my face. The doctor's expression changed immediately, and she asked if this was the first time the child had been violent toward me. I told her no, this was the 4th incident in 2 months, and explained the pattern of escalating behavior. She made notes in my chart, and then asked if the child's parents were aware of the violence. I said yes, but they claimed everything was ADHD symptoms that I was too uneducated to understand. The doctor looked at me for a long moment before saying she was required by law to file a report with Child Protective Services because a 7-year-old displaying this level of violence toward adults represented a serious safety concern. She said ADHD doesn't cause children to deliberately harm people or animals, and the behavior I described suggested either inadequate supervision, lack of appropriate treatment, or something more concerning than ADHD alone. I left the ER with discharge papers, a prescription for pain medication, and a growing sense that I'd just set something in motion that would tear my family apart. My phone started buzzing before I even got to my car. Nathan had called 6 times and left 3 voicemails. I listened to the first one and immediately deleted the rest. He was screaming about how I'd betrayed him by going to the hospital instead of just icing my jaw at home, about how I was clearly planning to make a big deal out of an accident, about how I was trying to turn everyone against Caleb. The second message was from my mother asking what happened and saying Nathan told her I was refusing to help with Caleb anymore because of prejudice against ADHD. The third was from Nathan again, this time threatening to sue me for defamation if I told anyone that Caleb had hurt me. I drove home and collapsed on my couch with the ice pack against my jaw, trying to process what had just happened. My relationship with my brother had always been complicated, but this felt different. This felt like Nathan had completely lost touch with reality and was willing to sacrifice everyone's safety to avoid admitting his parenting might be failing. The next morning, my jaw was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching ADHD symptoms and childhood behavioral disorders. Everything I read confirmed what the ER doctor had said. ADHD causes impulsivity, difficulty focusing, and hyperactivity, but it doesn't cause children to deliberately harm people or animals. Kids with ADHD might break things accidentally due to poor impulse control, but they don't lock adults in basements, or pour bleach in fish tanks, or throw metal objects at people's faces while maintaining eye contact. That afternoon, a woman named Julia Trent from Child Protective Services called and asked if she could meet with me to discuss the report filed by the ER doctor. I agreed, and she came to my apartment an hour later with a folder full of forms and questions. Julia was maybe 40 years old with tired eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd heard every excuse imaginable. She asked me to walk through each incident with Caleb in detail, including what happened before and after, how Nathan and his wife Stephanie responded, and whether I'd noticed any other concerning behaviors. I told her everything. The TV, the fish, the basement, the metal car. I showed her photos I'd taken of the broken TV and the empty fish tank. I described how Nathan always framed everything as ADHD symptoms, and how Stephanie seemed scared of Caleb, but wouldn't admit it. Julia took detailed notes and asked if I knew whether Caleb was receiving treatment for his ADHD. I said Nathan had mentioned medication and therapy, but I didn't know specifics. Julia said she'd be conducting a home visit and interviewing Nathan, Stephanie, and Caleb as part of her investigation. She warned me that Nathan would likely be angry when he found out I'd spoken to CPS, and that I should document any threatening or harassing contact from him. She gave me her card and said to call immediately if anything escalated. After she left, I sat in my apartment feeling sick with guilt and relief in equal measure. Guilt because I'd just reported my own brother to Child Protective Services. Relief because maybe now someone with actual authority would make Nathan face reality about his son's behavior. Nathan called 20 minutes later and started screaming before I even said hello. Child Protective Services had just left his house and informed him that I'd filed a complaint about Caleb being dangerous and neglected. Nathan said I'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, that I'd tried to have his son taken away over normal ADHD symptoms, that I was a monster who hated disabled children. I let him yell for about 30 seconds before interrupting. Nathan, I didn't file anything. The ER doctor filed a mandatory report because when a 7-year-old causes injuries severe enough to require emergency room treatment, healthcare providers are legally required to report it. I just answered CPS's questions honestly. Nathan's voice got even louder and more threatening. You could have lied. You could have told them it was an accident. You could have protected your family instead of throwing your nephew under the bus. But you chose to make this into a huge deal because you're prejudiced against neurodivergent kids, and you want to punish Caleb for having a disability. I pressed the ice pack against my still swollen jaw and tried to stay calm. Nathan, I love Caleb, but he hurt me badly enough that I needed medical attention, and that's not normal behavior for any 7-year-old, regardless of ADHD. The doctor was concerned, and she did what she's legally required to do. This isn't about discrimination. This is about a pattern of dangerous behavior that needs to be addressed. Nathan's tone shifted from angry to cold and calculated. You've destroyed this family. Mom and Dad are ashamed of you. Stephanie is devastated, and Caleb is traumatized by strangers coming to interrogate him because his uncle is an ableist bigot. I hope you're happy. He hung up before I could respond. 5 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice was strained, and she asked if it was true that I'd reported Nathan to Child Protective Services for Caleb having ADHD. I explained what actually happened, the injuries, the pattern of violence, the ER doctor's mandatory report. My mother was quiet for a long moment before saying, Nathan showed me photos of your jaw. That looks really painful. But honey, Caleb is just a little boy with ADHD. You're a grown man. Couldn't you have just been more careful around him until he learns better impulse control? The question hit me harder than the metal car had. My own mother was suggesting I should have protected myself better from a violent child instead of expecting the child's parents to address the violence. I asked her if she thought it was normal for a 7-year-old to cause injuries that required emergency room treatment. My mother said she didn't know what was normal for ADHD kids, but Nathan had always been sensitive and she didn't want the family torn apart over a misunderstanding. She asked if I could apologize to Nathan and explain to CPS that everything was fine. I told her no, I couldn't lie to Child Protective Services, and I wouldn't apologize for getting medical treatment after being assaulted. My mother sighed and said she hoped I knew what I was doing because this could have serious consequences for everyone. After we hung up, I realized my entire family was going to side with Nathan because admitting Caleb's behavior was dangerous meant admitting Nathan and Stephanie were failing as parents. It was easier to blame me for being discriminatory than to face the reality that something was seriously wrong. That evening, I got a text from my sister Lauren, asking if we could meet for coffee. Lauren was 2 years younger than me and had always been the diplomatic one in the family. We met at a cafe near her office and she looked exhausted. She said Nathan had called her crying about CPS investigating him, claiming I was trying to destroy his family because I hated kids with ADHD. Lauren asked for my side of the story, and I showed her the photos of my jaw, the broken TV, and the dead fish. I walked her through each incident in detail. Lauren listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said quietly, I babysat Caleb last month. He locked me in the bathroom for 2 hours, and I had to climb out the window to get out. When I told Nathan, He said Caleb was just playing and I'd overreacted. I didn't push back because I didn't want to seem ableist, but I was scared the whole time I was locked in there. She pulled out her phone and showed me bruises on her arms, where Caleb had bitten her when she'd tried to stop him from stabbing the couch cushions with scissors. Nathan said the biting was an oral sensory need related to ADHD. The scissors were impulse control issues. He has an explanation for everything that makes it sound like we're the problem for not understanding Caleb's disability. I stared at the photos of Lauren's bruised arms and felt rage building in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. Nathan was using ADHD as a shield to avoid addressing behavior that was escalating and putting multiple people at risk. I asked Lauren if she'd be willing to talk to Child Protective Services about what happened to her. She hesitated, then said she would, but she was scared of Nathan's reaction. We agreed to both document everything and cooperate fully with CPS's investigation. Over the next week, Julia Trent interviewed multiple family members and Caleb's teachers. She called me 3 days after her initial visit and said the investigation had revealed concerning patterns. Caleb's school had documented 15 incidents in the past semester involving violence toward other students, hitting, biting, throwing objects, and pushing kids downstairs. The school had recommended comprehensive psychological evaluation and intensive behavioral intervention, but Nathan and Stephanie had refused, insisting the school was discriminating against Caleb's ADHD and failing to provide appropriate accommodations. Julia said 2 of Caleb's teachers had reported being afraid of him after he'd thrown chairs and threatened them during classroom disruptions. The school had tried to arrange an IEP meeting to discuss specialized services, but Nathan had brought a lawyer who threatened to sue for disability discrimination if they tried to remove Caleb from the regular classroom. Julia's tone was grim as she explained that Caleb wasn't receiving any treatment beyond basic ADHD medication that clearly wasn't addressing the behavioral issues. She said Nathan had refused to answer most of her questions during the home visit, and Stephanie had barely spoken, except to repeat that everything was normal ADHD behavior. Julia had observed Caleb for an hour and noted that while he showed some typical hyperactive behaviors, he also displayed concerning signs of oppositional defiant disorder, possible conduct disorder, and lack of empathy when discussing the incidents where he'd hurt people. She said the combination of untreated behavioral issues, parental denial, and escalating violence meant she was recommending court-ordered psychological evaluation and parenting classes for Nathan and Stephanie. If they refused to cooperate, she'd recommend emergency removal of Caleb from the home until proper treatment could be established. I asked what would happen next, and Julia said a family court judge would review her report and make a determination within 2 weeks. She warned me again that Nathan would likely escalate his harassment once he received notice of the court proceedings. She was right. The next day, Nathan showed up at my workplace and caused a scene in the lobby, yelling about how I destroyed his family and tried to have his disabled son stolen by the government. Security had to escort him out, while he screamed that I was a bigot and everyone should know what I'd done. My boss called me into his office afterward and asked what was going on. I explained the situation as briefly as possible and showed him the photos of my injuries. My boss was understanding but concerned about Nathan disrupting the workplace again. He suggested I consider getting a restraining order if Nathan continued to harass me. That evening, I came home to find Nathan sitting in his car outside my apartment building. When I tried to walk past to get to my door, he got out and blocked my path. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and his voice was hoarse when he started talking. "They're going to take my son away because of you. CPS says we're neglecting him, and that Caleb needs psychological evaluation like he's some kind of dangerous criminal. He's 7 years old with ADHD, and you've convinced everyone he's a monster." I kept my distance and pulled out my phone, ready to call the police if Nathan made any threatening moves. "Nathan, I didn't convince anyone of anything. Multiple people have been hurt by Caleb's behavior, and his school has documented serious incidents. This isn't about ADHD. This is about untreated behavioral problems that are escalating. If you'd gotten him proper help months ago instead of making excuses, we wouldn't be in this situation." Nathan laughed, but it sounded unhinged. "Proper help? You mean drugs to sedate him into compliance? Therapy that pathologizes normal childhood energy? That's what you and CPS want. But I won't do that to my son. I won't let the medical establishment destroy who he is just because society doesn't accept neurodivergent children." I realized then that Nathan genuinely believed he was protecting Caleb by refusing treatment. He'd convinced himself that acknowledging the behavioral problems meant betraying his son's identity. "Nathan, this isn't about acceptance. This is about safety. Caleb is hurting people, and you're letting it happen. That's not protecting him. That's enabling him to develop patterns that will destroy his life." Nathan stepped closer and his face was inches from mine. "If they take Caleb, if they put him in some facility or force him on medication, I will never forgive you. You'll be dead to this family." Then he got back in his car and drove away, leaving me shaking in the parking lot. I went inside and immediately called Julia Trent to report Nathan's confrontation. She said this was exactly the kind of escalation she'd warned about and strongly recommended I file for a restraining order. She gave me the number for a victim's advocate who could help with the paperwork. The next morning, I went to the courthouse and filed for a temporary restraining order against Nathan, describing his threatening behavior and the incident outside my apartment. The clerk asked if I felt physically unsafe, and I said yes, absolutely. She processed my paperwork and said a judge would review it within 48 hours. 2 days later, I received notice that the temporary order had been granted, and Nathan was prohibited from coming within 300 feet of me or my workplace. The same day, Nathan received notice of the family court hearing regarding Caleb's evaluation and treatment requirements. He called me 32 times in 3 hours, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails about how I'd destroyed everything and would pay for what I'd done. I saved all the messages and sent them to Julia Trent, who forwarded them to the family court judge reviewing Caleb's case. The voicemails apparently convinced the judge that Nathan's judgment was severely impaired and that immediate intervention was necessary. The family court hearing happened on a Friday morning. I attended as a witness and sat in the back of the courtroom while Nathan, Stephanie, their lawyer, and Julia Trent presented their cases. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Kim, who'd been on the family court bench for 15 years. She reviewed Julia's report, the school's documentation, and medical records from the ER visit where I'd been treated. She asked Nathan directly why he'd refused the school's recommendation for comprehensive psychological evaluation. Nathan stood up and launched into a speech about how the medical establishment discriminates against neurodivergent children by pathologizing normal behaviors. He said Caleb's ADHD was being used as an excuse to label him as dangerous, when really the problem was that society doesn't accommodate children with different neurological makeups. He insisted that forcing Caleb into evaluation and treatment would traumatize him and reinforce the message that something was wrong with him. Judge Kim listened patiently and then asked Nathan if he understood that multiple people had been injured by Caleb's behavior, including family members who required medical treatment. Nathan said those were accidents caused by ADHD symptoms, not intentional violence. Judge Kim asked if Nathan thought it was acceptable for a 7-year-old to cause injuries requiring emergency room treatment. Nathan said no, but it wasn't Caleb's fault because he couldn't control his impulses due to his disability. Judge Kim's expression hardened and she said, "Mr. Morrison, ADHD does not cause children to deliberately lock adults in basements, pour bleach in fish tanks, or throw metal objects at people's faces. Those behaviors indicate serious conduct issues that require immediate professional intervention. Your refusal to seek appropriate treatment for your son constitutes medical neglect and puts both Caleb and everyone around him at risk." Nathan tried to interrupt, but Judge Kim raised her hand to silence him. She ruled that Caleb would undergo court-ordered psychological evaluation by an independent child psychiatrist within 30 days. Nathan and Stephanie would attend mandatory parenting classes focused on managing severe behavioral issues. If the evaluation revealed diagnoses beyond ADHD, Nathan and Stephanie would be required to follow the treatment plan recommended by the psychiatrist. If they refused to comply, custody would be reviewed and possible removal would be considered. Nathan stood up and started yelling about discrimination and government overreach, but the bailiff approached and Nathan's lawyer pulled him back down into his seat. Judge Kim said her order was final and dismissed the court. I left quickly through a side exit to avoid confronting Nathan in the hallway. Julia Trent caught up with me in the parking lot and said the court order was the best possible outcome given the circumstances. She said most parents complied once a judge got involved because the alternative was losing custody. She hoped Nathan would finally accept that Caleb needed help beyond ADHD medication. 2 weeks later, Caleb underwent the court-ordered evaluation with Dr. Stephen Yang, a child psychiatrist who specialized in severe behavioral disorders. The evaluation took 3 full days and included interviews with Caleb, Nathan, Stephanie, teachers, and family members. Dr. Yang also conducted cognitive testing, behavioral assessments, and reviewed all the documented incidents. His report was 45 pages long, and I got a copy through Julia Trent. The findings were devastating. Dr. Yang confirmed Caleb did have ADHD, but that was the least significant of his diagnoses. Caleb met full criteria for oppositional defiant disorder and was showing early indicators of conduct disorder, a serious condition characterized by persistent violations of social norms and the rights of others. Dr. Yang noted Caleb displayed callous, unemotional traits, including lack of empathy, lack of remorse, and shallow affect. When asked about hurting people, Caleb showed no concern for their pain and instead complained about being punished for his actions. Dr. Yang wrote that Caleb's behavior pattern suggested significant risk for developing antisocial personality disorder if intervention didn't occur immediately. The report detailed how Nathan and Stephanie's refusal to acknowledge the severity of Caleb's issues had allowed the behaviors to escalate unchecked. Dr. Yang recommended immediate placement in a specialized therapeutic program for children with severe conduct problems, intensive family therapy, and medication to address aggression and impulse control. He was blunt in stating that standard ADHD treatment was completely insufficient for Caleb's needs, and that without intensive intervention, Caleb was on a trajectory toward juvenile detention by adolescence. Nathan's response to the report was to post a 3,000-word essay on social media, claiming the psychiatric evaluation was biased and discriminatory. He wrote that Dr. Yang had pathologized normal ADHD behaviors because he didn't understand neurodivergent children. He accused me by name of orchestrating a conspiracy to label his son as dangerous. He claimed CPS, the family court system, and the psychiatric establishment were all colluding to force unnecessary treatment on disabled children. The post went viral in certain parenting communities, and I started receiving threatening messages from strangers who believed Nathan's version of events. People called me ableist, said I was trying to destroy a family, accused me of hating children with disabilities. Someone posted my workplace address and encouraged people to call my employer to report my discrimination. My boss received dozens of calls demanding I be fired for prejudice against neurodivergent children. He called me into his office and showed me some of the messages. They were vicious and specific, including threats of violence if I didn't apologize publicly to Nathan and Caleb. My boss said he believed my account of what happened, but the volume of harassment was creating a hostile work environment. He suggested I take a week of paid leave until things calmed down. I contacted a lawyer named David Freeman, who specialized in defamation and harassment cases. David reviewed Nathan's social media post and the threatening messages I'd received. He said Nathan had crossed the line from protected speech into actionable defamation by making false claims that portrayed me as discriminating against disabled children when I'd actually been protecting myself from documented violence. David drafted a cease and desist letter demanding Nathan remove the social media post and issue a public correction or face a defamation lawsuit. Nathan's response was to post again, this time claiming I was trying to silence him with legal threats because I couldn't handle being exposed as a bigot. He started a fundraiser to pay for legal fees to fight back against my alleged harassment of his family. The fundraiser raised $15,000 in 3 days from people who believed his narrative. David filed a defamation lawsuit in civil court, citing the false claims, the measurable harm to my reputation and employment, and Nathan's refusal to retract the statements after being informed they were false. The lawsuit asked for damages, a court order requiring Nathan to remove all defamatory posts, and a permanent injunction against further harassment. Nathan countersued for emotional distress, claiming my refusal to babysit Caleb and my cooperation with CPS had caused his family severe trauma. His lawyer argued that my actions constituted discrimination against a disabled child, and that Nathan had every right to speak publicly about his experiences. The legal battle dragged on for months, while Nathan continued his social media campaign, and I continued receiving threats from his supporters. Meanwhile, family court ordered Caleb to begin the intensive therapeutic program Dr. Yang had recommended. Nathan and Stephanie fought the placement, but eventually complied after the judge threatened immediate custody removal. Caleb was enrolled in a day treatment program that provided specialized education, behavioral therapy, and medication management for children with severe conduct issues. 3 months into treatment, Dr. Yang filed a progress report with family court. The report noted that Caleb's behavior had improved significantly with proper intervention. The medication regimen was reducing his impulsivity and aggression. The behavioral therapy was teaching him coping skills and beginning to address his lack of empathy. The structured environment was preventing the escalation patterns that had characterized his behavior at home and school. Most significantly, Dr. Yang noted that Stephanie had revealed during family therapy that she'd been afraid of Caleb for over a year, but Nathan had forbidden her from discussing it or seeking help. She described incidents where Caleb had threatened her with knives, pushed her downstairs, and hurt the family cat. She'd stayed silent because Nathan had convinced her that acknowledging the behavior was ableist and would result in Caleb being taken away. Dr. Yang wrote that Nathan's rigid denial of Caleb's issues had created a dangerous situation where Stephanie felt trapped and unable to protect herself or her son. The report recommended continued treatment for Caleb and intensive individual therapy for Nathan to address his denial and distorted thinking about disability. 6 months after the initial court order, Julia Trent called to tell me that Caleb's treatment was succeeding beyond expectations. He was exhibiting significantly less violent behavior and was beginning to show appropriate emotional responses to others' distress. The therapeutic program was preparing to transition him back to a regular school with additional supports in place. More importantly, Nathan had finally started to accept that Caleb's issues went beyond ADHD and that denying treatment had harmed his son rather than protected him. Nathan's defamation lawsuit against me was dismissed after the judge reviewed the complete record of Caleb's documented violence and found no evidence I'd discriminated against a disabled child. My defamation suit against Nathan proceeded to trial, and a jury found in my favor, awarding me $75,000 in damages for reputational harm and emotional distress. The court ordered Nathan to remove all social media posts making false claims about my actions and prohibited him from making further defamatory statements. Nathan complied with the order but never apologized directly. The fundraiser money his supporters had donated was seized to pay the judgment against him. My relationship with most of my family remained strained. My mother eventually acknowledged she should have taken my injuries more seriously instead of minimizing them as ADHD symptoms. My father apologized for not supporting me during the CPS investigation. Lauren and I grew closer through the experience, bonded by our shared understanding of what really happened versus the narrative Nathan had created. 2 years after I first refused to babysit Caleb, I received a letter from Stephanie. She'd divorced Nathan after he refused to continue with therapy and had resumed blaming everyone else for Caleb's problems. She wrote that leaving Nathan was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but watching him weaponize Caleb's diagnosis to avoid accountability had finally broken her. She had full custody of Caleb, who was now 9 years old and continuing in treatment. She said Caleb was doing well in school, had friends for the first time, and was learning to manage his behaviors appropriately. She thanked me for refusing to enable Nathan's denial and said my actions had ultimately saved Caleb's life by forcing intervention before the behaviors became irreversible. She included a drawing Caleb had made during art therapy, a picture of a family with the caption, "I'm sorry I hurt people." The apology was stilted and clearly guided by his therapist, but it was something. I never reconciled with Nathan, who maintained until the end that everyone had conspired against him and his neurodivergent son. But I sleep better knowing Caleb got the help he needed, that Stephanie escaped a situation where her fear was dismissed as prejudice, and that my refusal to be a punching bag for a violent child ultimately protected more people than just myself. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too.